The drone fell from the sky like a dead bird. IT did not make a sound when it hit the valley floor because the acid rain swallowed all sounds out there. The rain came down in thin silver threads, beautiful if you did not know what it did to skin. Reed Okafor watched it through the observation slit in the mountain wall, his breath fogging the thick glass. The drone had landed about 300 meters out. It was still in one piece, which was strange. Nothing that fell on Vorth stayed in one piece for long. He turned to the two people standing behind him. Dara had her arms crossed and was already doing the math in her eyes. Old Neris sat in her chair at the back of the observation room, wrapped in two coats, watching Reed the way she always watched him, like she was reading something written on the inside of his face. "It is not one of ours," Reed said. "No," Dara agreed. "Ours would not survive that drop." Reed pulled his coat from the hook on the wall. Dara moved to stop him and then stopped herself. She knew what he was going to do. She knew she could not talk him out of it. She started checking his suit seals instead. The suits they wore outside were not the kind from supply catalogs. They were built by hand, rebuilt by hand, patched with resin and strips of cured mushroom leather from the fungus farms 3 levels below. Every seal was hand-checked before every single trip outside. Reed stood still while Dara ran her fingers along the collar joint, the wristbands, the boot locks. She pressed each one twice. Her face was blank with focus. "Window is 3 hours," she said. Rain Reed's light. "I will be back in 40 minutes, Reed said. "Take Fun." He took Fun. Fun was 22 and had fast hands and knew when not to talk. They went through the outer lock together and stepped into the valley air. The rain touched Reed's suit and ran off in small yellow rivulets. The ground was pale gray stone, pocked and smooth from years of chemical wash. Nothing grew out here. Nothing had grown out here in longer than Reed had been alive on this world. The drone was a Union model. Reed saw the stamp on its side when they reached it, a blue ring inside a white circle, the mark of the Galactic Union Survey Fleet. His stomach dropped. He and Finn looked at each other through their visors without speaking. They carried it back between them. It was heavier than expected. Inside the outer lock, while the decontamination cycle ran, Reed kept his eyes on the drone. The blue ring. The white circle. The Union had not sent anything to Vorith in 11 years. The colony had stopped expecting them years before that. Dara met them at the inner door. She took one look at the drone and then looked at Reed, and her expression did not change, but her jaw tightened very slightly. They brought it to the main hall, a wide carved chamber on the 3rd level down, lit by strips of bioluminescent fungus running along the ceiling like veins of pale green light. People gathered quickly. Word moved fast inside Halden's wall. It always had. When you lived in a mountain with 4,000 people, silence did not last long. Old Neris came last, walking slowly with her cane, and sat in the chair someone always kept clear for her near the front. The drone's memory drive was cracked but readable. It took Dara 2 hours to pull the message out. Reed stood against the wall the whole time and waited. People came and went. Someone brought him a cup of water, and he drank it without tasting it. When Dara finally looked up from her screen, her face told him everything before her mouth did. "They're coming back," she said. "Not to help us." She read it aloud. The Union had reclassified Vorith as a contaminated dead world. The chemical saturation in the atmosphere had exceeded all recovery thresholds. The decision had been made to perform a controlled stellar pulse, a detonation that would burn the atmosphere clean. It would also burn everything on the surface, everything in the mountain, everything that was left. The pulse window was in 60 days. The hall was very quiet. Reed heard the fungus on the ceiling making its small, soft light. He heard someone, somewhere in the back, begin to cry very quietly. Old Neris spoke first. Her voice was thin, but it did not shake. "They think we are already dead." "Yes," Reed said. "Then we must inform them otherwise." Reed looked around the hall. He looked at the faces of people he had known for most of his life. He looked at children who had been born inside this mountain and had never once walked under an open sky without a suit. He looked at the memorial board on the far wall. The names of every person the colony had lost since the rains began. 613 names carved into the stone, but he looked at all of it for a long moment. Then he walked to the planning wall and picked up a piece of chalk and began to write that he wrote 2 words first, Transmitter. Summit. The cry in the back of the hall had stopped. People were watching him. He kept writing. Numbers, angles, material lists, shift rotations. His handwriting was not pretty, but it was very clear. Outside, the rain continued to fall on the world that had already taken everything it could take from them. Inside the mountain, the chalk moved across the stone. Veth had lived with humans for 9 years, and he still did not understand them. He sat in the corner of the planning room. His corner, the one with the extra cushion that Dara had left there 6 years ago and never removed, and watched Reed right on the stone wall. The old Drin's one good. I tracked the chalk marks. His bad eye, clouded white since the poison gas exposure during his exile, pointed at nothing that he understood the technical content of what Reed was writing. Veth had been an engineer before he became a saboteur and then a ghost. He could read load calculations and frequency bands without effort. What he could not understand was why Reed was still standing. The man had just been told he had 60 days to live. He was writing materials lists. Durin noticed Veth watching and came to sit near him. She did not sit facing him the way most humans did. She sat facing the same direction he was facing, looking at the same thing. He had noticed humans did this when they wanted to talk without making it feel like a confrontation. He had never seen Drin do this. Drin looked at each other directly or not at all. He will not stop until there is a plan, Dara said. He did not stop even before there was a reason, Veth replied. His voice was low and rough, like something dragged over gravel. I have watched him for 9 years. He finds a wall and he fills it. She smiled very slightly. Yes. Veth had not expected to be alive 9 years ago. He had sabotaged the Druin atmospheric dispersal program, destroyed 4 canisters of chemical compound that would have accelerated the rain across the entire northern range, killing everything in it. His own people had exiled him for it. They left him in a cave 2 kilometers from Halden's wall with 3 days of water and no suit. The humans had found him on the 2nd day. He was nearly dissolved at the collar and one wrist. A small team had been outside doing a structural survey of the cave network. They almost walked past him. One of them, a young woman, long dead now, her name on the memorial wall, had stopped and looked twice at the shape in the dark. They carried him inside. He had expected to be questioned, used, then released back into the rain. Instead, they cleaned his wounds with the same supplies they used on their own people. They gave him a room, small but private, sealed properly against the damp, with a light he could control. Old Naris had come to see him on the 3rd day. She sat beside him and said, "You stopped the northern dispersal. We would have died faster without that, so you may stay as long as you need." He had not known how to answer. Drun did not say things like that. Drun calculated worth before offering anything. He thought about all of this while Reed filled the wall with chalk. When Reed finally stopped, he turned and said, "The transmitter housing needs to go on the summit. We have the components. We do not have the housing structure. We have to build it outside." The room became very still. Outside meant the rain. The rain meant suits and sealed seams, and the constant possibility of a slow burn if something went wrong. People had died outside. Not often. The colony had learned hard and well, but they had died. Reed said, "I know the rain patterns are unpredictable, but someone told me once that they are not completely random." He looked at Veth. Veth sat up straighter on his cushion. The whole room turned to look at him, and he did not like it, but he held still. The Druin mapped the chemical dispersal patterns as a weapon system, Veth said. They wanted to know when the rain would be light enough to allow troop movement. They cataloged 11 years of weather data from this valley before the exile period. He paused. I kept a copy. Reed looked at him with the same expression Veth had never been able to name. It was not gratitude exactly. It was something that looked like the confirmation of something Reed had already believed. "You have the gap windows," Reed said. "Yes." They averaged 2 to 4 hours. The longest recorded was 6. They occur every 30 to 40 hours. That is enough. Veth transferred the data to Dara's tablet. She and Reed cross-referenced it against the colony's own weather logs. The patterns aligned closely enough to give them working windows. Then Reed asked the room to vote. The Druin did not vote on survival decisions. Commanders decided and others followed. because consensus in a crisis was considered a fatal delay. But Reed stood at the front of the room and said this was everyone's life and everyone had the right to say yes or no. There were 3,847 people in Halden's Wall. They voted in shifts through the night. Reed sat against the wall and waited without sleeping. Veth stayed in his corner. Dara brought both of them water and mushroom bread. The count was finished before morning point 3, 847 votes. All in favor. Old Neris had cast the last one from her sickbed. She had apparently told the vote counter, "Mark it down. Then go get some sleep." Veth looked at the number for a long time. He thought about his people, who had never once all agreed on anything. He thought about the cave and the woman who had looked twice at the shape in the dark. He thought, "I've been trying to understand them for 9 years." Perhaps understanding was not the right word for what he was doing. The first weather window opened at dawn on the second day after the vote. Reed had the first team suited and standing at the outer lock before the rain even thinned. 6 people, packs loaded with pre-cut metal struts and resin canisters. Every seal double-checked by Dara, who had not slept. Reed told her to go rest. She told him to stop talking. The lock opened. They went out. The summit was 300 meters above the main entrance, along a carved stone path that wound in shallow switchbacks up the mountain face. The colony had built it years ago as an observation route. In the early days, people had gone up just to look at the stars on clear nights. No one had gone purely for that purpose in a long time. There was not enough time for standing and looking. The first shift worked for 3 hours and 40 minutes before the rain returned. They had planted the foundation posts and poured the base resin. When the yellow threads started falling again, they came down the path at a run and cycled through the lock without being told. Reed counted heads. 6 in. 6 that he exhaled that on the third day, a Setha scout ship entered orbit above Oreth. No one on the ground knew this yet. The colony's sky sensors had been offline for 2 years, damaged in a rock slip that had also taken out a section of the upper corridor. Reed had it on the repair list. It was number 47 on a list of 63 things. Commander stood at the viewport of her ship and looked down at the planet. She had been sent ahead of the Union demolition fleet to run a final atmospheric scan and confirm the surface was uninhabited. The scan was straightforward work. She did not expect complications. Her instruments showed chemical saturation consistent with the report. Acid rain across 60% of the visible surface. No organic signatures in the open lowlands. But on the upper slope of one of the larger mountain formations, her scanner returned something odd. Movement. Structured movement. Small figures, moving in groups, carrying objects along a defined path. She ran the scan again. Same result. She sat with this for a long time on the mountain. The work continued. Reed rotated teams every 40 minutes. Children passed components through the sealed inner hatch. Smaller hands were better for fitting the connector pieces into their housings. The elderly colonists worked the timing boards, calling out rain readings every 10 minutes, calculating the window margins. Every person had a job. No one waited for someone else to assign them one. On day 5, the rock gave way. It was a shelf of stone on the upper path, worn thin by years of chemical seep from above. 3 workers were on it when it cracked. They dropped 20 meters to a narrow ledge below, landing hard. One of them, a man named Grun, did not move for a moment that was very long. Reed was already on his way up with a hand line before anyone called for him, but he went down the face slowly, digging his boot plates into the rock, feeding the line through the anchor ring. The rain had not started yet, but the sky had gone the color of old brass, which meant it was coming. He reached the ledge and checked Grun first. Alive, wrist broken, head hit, breathing. The other 2 were shaken, but standing. He tied Grun to the line first and called up for the team to pull. Then the second worker. Then the third. By the time Reed started climbing back up on his own, the first thin threads of yellow rain were falling around his shoulders. He felt the heat of it through the suit at the back of his neck, which meant a partial seal failure near the collard. He kept climbing. When he came through the inner lock, Dara was waiting. She pulled his helmet off and checked the back of his neck without saying a word. Small red line, not deep. She cleaned it and dressed it and told him his suit needed 2 hours of repair work before he could go out again. For hours, she said, to his expression. 2, he said. You're not a doctor. she said. Neither are you, he said, because she was a medic, not a doctor, and she had told him the difference 7 times and always looked slightly annoyed when he blurted, and the slight annoyance usually meant she was less worried. She was less worried now. She patched the collar seal in 90 minutes. Veth had watched all of it from the inner corridor. He watched Reed eat half a ration bar, stand up, check the timing board, and start reviewing the next shift's load plan. He thought about what Dara had said days ago. He feels all of it. That is the point. Outside on the mountain, a small probe descended quietly from orbit and landed in the valley 300 meters from the work path. It was silver and smooth and shaped like nothing Veth had ever seen. It had a camera on its front face, and the camera was pointed at the mountain. Dara found it during the next window, on her way to deliver components to the summit team. She stopped and looked at it. It was clearly a survey device. It was clearly watching. She leaned down so her visor was close to the camera. She did not gesture or perform. She spoke clearly, knowing the suit's external mic would carry it. "We are still here," she said. "We have always been here. Come see what we built." Then she picked up her pack and kept walking up the mountain. The transmitter was finished on day 12. That IT stood on the summit of the mountain like something that had grown there, rough-welded, irregular, patched with 3 different kinds of metal and sealed with hand-poured resin that had cured uneven in the cold. It was not beautiful. It worked .to power, a signal strong enough to reach the Union Council directly. They needed to draw from the colony's primary heat core. The core kept the lower levels of the mountain warm enough for the fungus farms, which kept people fed. Without it running, they would have heat for roughly 4 days before the deep cold of the stone crept in and made the living quarters dangerous. Reed put it to the room again. The room said, "Do it." They powered the transmitter at noon on day 13, and the broadcast went out in 3 languages, Standard, Drune Technical, and the Setha frequency band, which Veth helped calibrate because he had worked in joint faction communications before the wars had made that impossible. The broadcast was not a distress call. Reed had decided that early. A distress call asked for help. What they were sending was evidence. Reed gave coordinates, population counts, survival statistics, infrastructure maps. He spoke flatly, without drama, the way a person reads a report, because he wanted the Union to understand this was not desperation. This was record. Then old Neris spoke. She read names. All 613 of them. She read them slowly, with the full birth date and death date of each person, in a single sentence about who they had been. Not their job, who they had been. She said, Ruka Balin, who sang badly and knew it, and sang anyway. She said, Taro Okafor, 7 years old, who collected small stones and kept them in a jar by her bed. Reed stood against the wall while Neris read his daughter's name. His face did not change. His hands, at his sides, were still. Dara spoke after Neris. She held up records, medical logs, school attendance sheets, crop yields, birth registrations. She said, "We have had 41 births inside this mountain. Every one of them is alive. Here are their names." She read those 2 that in orbit. Commander Ear received the broadcast in real time. She had been composing her surface report when the signal came through in the Setha frequency band, which meant someone down there knew enough about her people to reach them directly. She stopped composing her report and listened. The Setha were not sentimental people. Ear was less sentimental than most. She had made decisions during the long wars that she considered correct and had not revisited. She listened to an old human woman read 613 names. Ear's people had no tradition of naming their dead. The Setha recorded numbers, casualty counts, unit losses. The dead became data. It was efficient. She sat and listened to every name, and by the time it was finished, she had not moved for over an hour. The Setha had a saying, "What is gone does not require a voice." Ear had believed this her entire life. It was harder to believe now. The Union Council received the signal 14 hours later. The demolition faction argued environmental protocol overrode habitation. The preservation faction argued back. The debate went nowhere quickly. Inside the mountain, the cold began. Without the heat core running at full capacity, the temperature in the lower chambers dropped. Not dangerously, not yet, but enough that people wore 2 coats to sleep, and the children's section had extra blankets piled in from storage. 2 elderly colonists, a man named Barrow and a woman named Lees, developed chills and shallow breathing on the second cold night. Dara worked through until morning. She moved between them hourly, adjusting covers, monitoring temperature, giving warm mushroom broth in small amounts. Neither had family left alive in the colony. Dara sat with each of them for a while and talked about nothing in particular, the farms, a funny thing that had happened in the corridor, what she remembered about the color of sky from the photograph in the archive room. Both of them made it to morning. On day 15, Veth asked Reed something he had been holding for a long time. "The broadcast," he said. "Will you send a second one?" "If we need to," Reed said. Veth was quiet for a moment. "I want to add something to it, if you will allow it." Reed looked at him. "What is it?" Veth said, "A file. Technical documentation. 11 years of the Drune chemical weapons program. The full development record, the field test data, the names of every official who authorized it." He paused. "I have carried it since my exile. I did not know who to give it to." Reed was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yes." There was no ceremony in it. No long speech. Just yes. Veth thought, 9 years I waited for someone worth giving it to. He had not expected it to feel this simple. The second broadcast went out before the heat core was restored. The data file attached to it was larger than the first transmission by a factor of 40. In orbit, Commander Ear read the file for 6 hours straight. When she finished, she sat for a long time with her hands flat on her console. Then she began writing, not her surface report, something else, something she had never written before in her career. A witness account, a formal Setha legal declaration that halted any Union action until her testimony was fully heard. Outside, the rain fell and fell and fell. On day 47, a man named Goss called a meeting without asking Reed first. He had worked the farms for 12 years, knew the tunnels better than most, and had never once asked for anything extra. He was not a cruel man. He was a man who had done the math in the dark and did not like the answer. He stood in the main hall and said it plainly. The colony had one emergency shuttle, enough fuel for a single launch, enough seats for 200 people. The Union had not confirmed a stay. The demolition window opened in 13 days. 200 people could leave. 200 people could live. The hall got very quiet. Goss said, "I am not saying we abandon anyone. I am saying we save someone." Reed was standing at the back. He did not speak yet. Others did. A woman named Seti said, "Who chooses the 200? Goss said it should be the young, the medics, people with skills to rebuild. Seti said, "And the rest." Goss had no good answer to that. He had a true answer. The rest would die, but saying it did not make a plan. Reed walked to the front slowly. The room watched him. He stood next to Goss, not across from him, and looked out at all the faces. He said, "I will not choose 200. Goss said, "Then you are choosing 0. You are choosing all of us die here." Reed said, "I am choosing that we do not cut our own people into the saved and the left. Not while we still have another option." "What other option?" Goss said. "There is no other option. We sent the signal. No one came." Reed said, "Someone is coming." He did not say it like a promise. He said it like a person reporting what the instruments showed. 2 days later, Commander Ear descended. Her shuttle came down in the valley during a rain window, guided in by Reed on the colony's short-range radio. Ear had filed the witness account 6 days earlier. She had not told the colony. She had not wanted their behavior altered by the knowledge. She had wanted to see them as they were. She stood at the outer lock and waited. The lock opened. Reed was on the other side. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. Then he said, "Come in." He walked her through Halden's wall himself. He did not narrate or explain. He simply walked, and she followed. She saw the fungus farms first, rows of pale growth under warm light tubes, tended by a group of teenagers who glanced at her and then returned to their work. She saw the school carved into the eastern tunnel wall, desks cut from stone, drawings pressed flat under resin sheets on the walls, a board with math problems half erased. She saw the water filtration hall, running on 2 repaired pumps, and one that Reed told her had been broken for 3 years and was being kept alive by what he called inventive engineering and what most people called hope. She stopped at the memorial wall. She had not expected it. It was not marked. It was just a section of corridor that had been smoothed and engraved, floor to ceiling, with names. The carving was careful. Someone had spent a great deal of time on each letter. Ear stood in front of it for a long time. Reed stood beside her and did not speak. Ear's people built monuments to victories. They marked fleet positions and territorial gains. They did not carve the names of the lost into stone and walk past them every day. She did not understand what it did for the living to see the dead named so carefully. She thought about the broadcast. The old woman's voice reading names for over an hour. She thought, perhaps it does not do something for the living. Perhaps it is simply done for the dead. Because it is owed. She turned to Reed and said, I filed a witness account 8 days ago. The demolition order is paused while it is heard. You have more time. Reed said, How much more? Enough, she said, if the vote goes correctly. And if it does not. Ear looked at the wall of names. She looked at the names of people she had never known and who had never known her. She thought about a single sentence she had not been able to stop thinking about since the broadcast. Taro Okafor, 7 years old, who collected small stones and kept them in a jar by her bed. Then I will file a second account, she said, and a third. The process has no limit. Reed looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once, which she had learned meant more than most things humans said at length. In the main hall, Goss had been sitting alone near the back for most of the day. That evening, he went to the memorial wall. He stood in front of it for a long time. Then he started reading, just reading, moving his eyes along the names, one by one, and no one watched him. No one commented that he stayed there for nearly an hour. When he came back to the planning room, he sat down and said nothing. He picked up a materials report and started reading that instead. Reed looked at him once and looked away. Outside, the rain continued to fall on the mountain as it had for as long as anyone alive could remember. But inside, every lamp was lit, and the fungus on the ceiling glowed its pale and steady green, and the mountain held. On day 59, Reed climbed to the summit alone that he went during a weather window, suited, without telling anyone. Dara found out anyway. She always did, and she let him go. She tracked his suit beacon from the inner monitor and said nothing to anyone else. The summit was cold. The transmitter stood against the sky, rough-welded and irregular, built by hands that had worked in rain windows with 40-minute countdowns. Reed stood next to it and looked out at the mountain range. Hundreds of kilometers of stone, running from horizon to horizon under a sky the color of old metal. The valley below was white with rain. Somewhere in there, under all that silver fall, was the memorial board that the colonists had painted on the valley floor years ago. Just an arrow pointing up, pointing at the mountain, saying, still here. He thought about Rude. He did not let himself think about her often. Not because it hurt less with time. It did not. But because there was always something else that needed the attention, always something that would break if he looked away too long. This was the first morning in 11 years when there was nothing left to build that he sat down on the stone next to the transmitter. The rain was thin today. He could see a long way that he thought about her small jar of stones, lined up on the shelf by her bed. He had kept the jar. It was on a shelf in his quarters on the 5th level down, in a recess he had cut by hand. He went past it every morning that he sat with this for a while. Then Dara came up the path. She had suited and climbed without announcing herself, and she sat down next to him the way she always sat, facing the same direction, not making a conversation unless he made it one. The wind moved through the rocks around them. Below, the valley rain fell in long, silver lines. After a while, Reed said, her name was Rue. Dara did not say anything. She waited. She was 7, he said. She collected small stones. She never explained her system for which ones were worth keeping, but there was definitely a system. She was very firm about the jar. Dara still did not speak. Her presence was steady beside him, like the stone. I was outside doing a pressure check on the west tunnel when the first bad storm came early, he said. I was 40 minutes away. I ran the whole way, but the seal on her section failed before I reached her. He paused. I got there in time to carry her out. Not in time for the other thing. Dara said, I know. He looked at her. Old Naris told me, she said. Years ago. She said you needed someone to know, and you would never say it yourself. Reed was quiet for a moment. Then he said, She was right. Footsteps on the path below. Slow, careful footsteps with a rhythm Reed recognized. Veth, moving on his old legs, taking the switchbacks one at a time. He appeared at the top of the path, breathing harder than usual, and sat down on Reed's other side without ceremony. The three of them sat together on the summit and watched the rain fall on the world that had burned them and failed to finish the job. Then Dar's radio crackled. She lifted it. A voice came through, the colony's comms operator, trying to stay calm and not quite managing it. The Union Council had issued a final ruling. The demolition order was suspended. Not canceled, not yet, but suspended indefinitely pending a full inhabited world review. Vorith had been reclassified. The humans of Halden's Wall were on record as a recognized population under Union protection. The radio crackled again, and then there was noise in the background. Voices. A lot of voices. And then, faintly, through 400 meters of stone, the sound of people shouting. Dara lowered the radio. She looked at Reed. He was looking out at the valley. His hands were on his knees. After a moment, he stood up, straightened his suit, and looked at both of them. "We still need to fix pump 3, he said. Dara laughed. It came out sharp and then soft, and she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth for a second. Veth made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was something adjacent to one, something that did not have a name in Droon. They went back down the mountain together. Inside the entrance hall, the children's mural covered the wall from the floor to as high as the smallest of them could reach and no further. It had been started years ago by someone no one could remember and added to whenever someone had the time and the chalk. Now it was finished. It showed a mountain. Rain falling from sky made of gray lines. And at the base of the mountain, small human figures with their palms pressed flat against the stone, not being crushed by it, not running from it. Holding it up, Reed stopped in front of it. He stood there for a long time. Behind him, the colony moved and breathed and carried on. 3,847 people in a mountain they had built with their hands on a world that had tried very hard to kill them and failed. The rain burned the world. Humanity carved hope into the mountain wall. The wall held.